Kia ora, my name's Cameron. I'm the lead pastor here at Village Baptist. And what was really interesting this morning was notices. See, the thing on Sunday services, it can be really easy to set into a kind of a perspective where church notices are like the infomercials on TV. You know, they're the thing you kind of like mute and phase out and then come back in when the show starts again. And we can approach things like church notices in that way. You know, it can be easy to slip into that sort of a way of thinking. But what I really liked about this morning was how we saw that the notices in a church service in this context is far more than that. Far more than an infomercial that breaks up the good stuff. That they are an invitation to partner and join in the good things God's doing in the world. You know, those notices, that was an invitation to join in God's mission and good things that He's up to over in India. That was an invitation to join in the good things God is doing right here through Alpha Ministry and then through our intermediate and youth ministry. If we tune our ears to hear what the Spirit might be saying, what we can see in those infomercials is actually an invitation into God's mission. And I really like that about this morning. But that's not what I'm going to talk to you about. That's just me chatting away. What we're here to explore this morning is the next step in our series called Learning the Way. It's about learning to follow the way, so learning and following. You know, they work together. If you learn and follow, that's a good combo. So it works. Before we get into that, a little show and tell. Yeah, I used to love show and tell in school. It was the high point of my primary school life. And it was a high point of my social life in primary school too. There was a guy in my class, Mrs. Haythornthwaite's class, called Timothy Jacob. He was cool. And I brought a K'NEX motorbike one day for show and tell, and he said it was cool. And so because he's cool and he thought my motorbike was cool, that meant that for that day, I was cool. He's a pastor now. He's a colleague. Yeah, I met up with him again after having not seen him since primary school at Kerry Baptist College. How about that? He's a pastor in Karori Baptist. But anyway, that's not what I'm here. I've got another kind of show and tell for you. This is my box. And it's an Anzac biscuit tin, which is appropriate since Anzac Day is coming up. But the contents of this box are not original to me. The contents of this box is the remnants, kind of leftovers from the contents of my granddad's box. And in my granddad's box, he stored all of those bits and pieces that were important for him, the memories of his time during World War II. And so that's why in my box I've got a few things. You know, when he passed away, it kind of got distributed amongst the family, but I've got some. I've got 3 of his photos. So it's him with his squadron that he was serving alongside the planes that he looked after. I've got a little map. You see a map there, a map from his time when he was stationed in Bougainville. And I've got 3 flyers as well that they distributed that they airdropped to encourage the enemy to surrender. This is my box, and it contains the memories and the contents of some of what was in my granddad's box. And I used to love sitting in my granddad's lap after he pulled his box out. Or I'd sit in his lap and he would pull one item at a time out of his box and he would tell me a story after story after story. And I couldn't tell you how many times we went through that box together, hearing the same story over and over again. It would have been many dozens of times. I was disappointed when I went to my granddad's house and he didn't pull out the box. But as much as I enjoyed sitting on my granddad's lap, hearing him tell those stories as he pulls out those items from his box, I think that he enjoyed telling them as much as I enjoyed listening to them. Because those stories were stories from a time when he found himself as part of a bigger story, a story that was bigger than himself. Stories from a time when he played his part to make a difference in the service of others. And this is where our journey began 2 weeks ago as we explored the first few verses of the Gospel of Matthew. And we saw how Matthew begins the story of Jesus by telling us that we can have a place in Jesus' story. And that having a place in Jesus' story, it means that we have the honor of partnering with Jesus in the good things he's doing, and alongside the pride of being able to share those good stories that result. Sharing those stories of those times when we joined with Jesus in doing good things in the world, telling those stories to our children and our grandchildren, just as my granddad experienced pride sharing his stories with me. But it's one thing to believe that we have a place in Jesus' story. It's entirely another to actually find our place within it. And so what does Matthew have to say about that? How might Matthew guide us in learning the way of Jesus? Well, when we work through the Gospel of Matthew, and you're more than welcome to open your Bibles to the Gospel of Matthew, when we work through the story that he tells, he moves on from the genealogy we explored a couple of weeks ago to the story of Jesus' birth. And we work through that story every Christmas, so many of you will be pretty familiar with it. And he goes from the genealogy to the birth and then to Jesus' baptism. And we covered the story of Jesus' baptism in our reflections during Easter. But after that, after the story of his birth and his baptism, we arrive at Matthew chapter 5. At the beginning of Jesus' formal ministry with the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount is designed to set the trajectory for everything that's to come. It's about everything that Jesus will say and do. This is painting the outlines of a picture that it will fill in with color in the stories to come. And what we find there in Matthew chapter 5, verse 13, is this. You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Here Jesus provides us with 3 metaphors about what it means to follow his way, to participate in the good things that he's doing in the world. And these metaphors are of light, of salt, of light, and a town or a city on a hill. Now, I mightn't understand what salt and light means, but I have heard that whole city on a hill thing before. And for anyone who was here last week, you might understand why I think that Sim might have heard that phrase before as well. Because I've heard American politicians use that line. I've heard them use it to describe America's role in the world, a nation that is destined to be exceptional, a nation that shows all other nations what it means to do nationhood right. America is, as some of their politicians would have us believe, the city on a hill. So this city on a hill business, it must have something to do with living a significant life. Maybe a life that is attracted to others. Maybe it's the kind of life that others would do well to model themselves against. This must be something about what it means to follow the way of Jesus, something about living a significant life. But if that's what city on a hill means, what about that salt and light business? Well, the challenge with salt is that using it as a metaphor, you can end up with any number of different results as to what it might mean. You know, salt makes things taste good. I add a little bit too much to my dinner. And when pagans would do sacrifice, they would add salt to the sacrifice so it tasted good to the gods. Salt makes things taste good. But salt also makes things last a long time. It's used in preservatives, which is why the Jews then would actually add salt to some of their sacrifices to symbolize the enduring covenant that God made with them, because it's preservative. In the right quantities, Salt is beneficial for the soil, which is why it has been used at times as a kind of fertilizer. But if you add too much, it can render the soil absolutely barren, which is behind the whole story of Rome salting the land around Carthage after they sacked it. And to top all of that off, in the Old Testament, Elisha uses salt to purify water. So when we have that image of salt, well, what on earth can Jesus be talking about when he's talking about salt? It could be any number of things. Well, which one is the right one? Well, the interesting thing is that Jesus doesn't just give us that image of salt in a way that stands alone. He gives it to us in a way that associates it with light. So maybe the metaphor of light can shed a little light on what it means to be salt. Well, unfortunately, there's as many metaphors for light as there is for salt. And all of them are different from the metaphorical meanings of salt, except in one case. If in 2 Chronicles chapter 13, I'm sure that's a book you're very familiar with, 2 Chronicles 13, we see a reference of God's covenant of salt with David. And this covenant was a promise that both to him and to his descendants that the kingship would be theirs forever. And so here we see a connection between the idea of covenant and the metaphor of salt. Then in Isaiah chapter 42, God says to his people that he will make them to be a covenant people, a light for the Gentiles. And so where 2 Chronicles connected salt to the covenant, Isaiah connects the covenant to light. Do you mind if we have the next slide? There we go. Those are the passages. And what this means for us when we engage with Jesus using these images of salt and light and living a life of significance, what it means to make Jesus' story our own, what it means is that we are called to embody what we already are as disciples of Jesus. And what it means to live a significant life following the way of Jesus is to embody what it means to be a member of his covenant people. That through this we might experience what it means to be kept by God, to be used as a light of his revelation, to open the eyes of the blind and to free the captives from prison. If we can have the next slide, please. And ultimately to release those from the dungeon who sit in darkness. And this is how you live a life of heroic significance. As a disciple of Jesus, it is about being what you already are, embodying what it means to be a member of God's covenant people. And when we're going through this journey of exploring what it means to follow the way of Jesus, and we have learnt that we are all invited to this place, and we're beginning to get a sense that what it means to find our place in the story is to embody what it means to be the covenant people of God, it feels like we're starting to get there, but we haven't quite arrived. You know, like the outlines are being drawn, but it hasn't been colored in. The plane is landing, but it hasn't touched the tarmac. So this is good, but I think we need a little bit more. And we find that in what Jesus says in the passage just before the one we just read about salt and light. Just above that passage in Matthew chapter 5, from verse 3 onwards, Jesus says this: "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. And blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." if you want to know what it looks like to find your place in God's story, if you want to know what it looks like to embody what it means to be a member of God's covenant people, if you want to know what it means to be the salt of the earth, the light of the world, a city on a hill, that's it. Right there. That's what it looks like. And key to understanding this list of the Beatitudes is first recognizing that apart from those who are impure in heart, everything it describes is undesirable. There is nothing desirable about being poor in spirit. There is nothing desirable about mourning. There isn't anything particularly desirable about meekness, and there's nothing desirable about thirsting for a righteousness that just seems to never be realized. There is nothing desirable about having to be merciful or a peacemaker, because typically that means that either you've been wronged and need to exercise mercy, or you find yourself in a conflict and have to play the peacemaker. There is nothing desirable about suffering for doing what's right, about being insulted, persecuted, having evil said about you. None of that is desirable. And yet Jesus says that these kinds of people, they are the blessed ones. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. They will receive divine comfort. They will inherit the earth, and they will see the righteousness they thirst for. They will experience mercy. They will see God. They will be made into a child of His, and they will be rewarded by Him. They are the blessed ones because they have found their place in God's story and are embodying what it means to be the salt and the light of the covenant. But why? Is this just some kind of like pity thing on Jesus' behalf? You know, those guys are doing it hard, so they're going to be extra blessed to just sort of try and balance things out. Is that what's going on? It's just pity? Now, the thing about these people, these kinds of people, the reason why they embody what it means to be the members of the covenant of God is because they are living with Jesus in the world as it really is. See, the thing is given enough time, money, or intention, we can insulate ourselves from the world pretty well. If we want to, we see extremes of that in like Gloria Vale and the Exclusive Brethren, but we do it all the time in ways that are far more subtle, don't we? You know, we can select our friend groups from those, the colleagues that we associate with, from those who are like us and who don't make any demands of us. And if they do make demands of us, we can kind of hold them at an arm's length and express sympathy, but not really do anything. You know, when we see problems emerging in our community or a social group, we can say to ourselves, "Oh, thank God that's not me," and then continue walking on the other side of the road. We can wash our hands saying, "Hey, that's not my problem," and we look the other way. Or we could go so far as to say that somebody should do something about that to other people who say that somebody should do something about that. So we all say that somebody should do something about that and feel good about saying that without anybody actually doing anything. We can do that. We can live this kind of way if we want to. We can create all sorts of defenses to avoid us encountering the messiness and brokenness of the world that we actually live in. But what it means to be the covenant people of God, what it means to be salt of the earth and the light of the world, it means that we live in the world as it really is, not merely within the gated communities of our own creation. It means that we see the pain and we choose not to look away. It means that we encounter the brokenness and we choose to enter into it. And just as Christ embraced us in our messiness and our brokenness, we embrace others in theirs, and so be for them his healing process, his healing presence in the process. That is what significance looks like. That's what the covenant looks like. Significance looks like the burden that comes from hearing people's stories, such that you allow yourself to feel their pain and carry their story with you. Blessed, Jesus says, are those who are poor in spirit. Significance looks like love, loving even those who might be hard to love, so that when those relationships enter a rocky patch, if they break down or we lose them, we feel that deeply. Blessed, Jesus says, are those who mourn. Significance looks like insignificance, like those who honor others before themselves and who choose the positions of foot washer over positions of privilege. Blessed, Jesus says, are the meek. Significance looks like dissatisfaction, a dissatisfaction that comes from longing for God's healing in a land of broken people. Blessed, Jesus says, are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Significance looks like those who bring an end to those cycles of violence that we see all throughout the world, but doing it not through an exercise of power, but by taking the hit and responding with mercy instead of retribution. Blessed, Jesus says, are the merciful. Significance looks like those who do the right thing, even at great personal cost. Blessed, Jesus says, are those who are persecuted because of righteousness. And within this church family, here at Village Baptist, we actually have many, many stories and examples of this. Odds are, you're sitting next to someone who has embodied what it means to be the covenant people of God in a significant way. And there are many people in this church who have fostered children. People have offered respite care. Some of those are for kids who are related to them, some of them aren't. And caring like this for fostered children, what that means is that that person has chosen to live in the world as it really is, such that they have seen the pain and the brokenness within it. But not only have they lived in the world to see it, but they live in that world with Jesus, and so they are led to do something about it. To see the pain, to see the brokenness, to enter into their lives in response, to take hurting people and to seek to bring healing and a hope and a future where there previously was brokenness. That's what it looks like. But the kicker is, sometimes broken people break people. Sometimes hurting people hurt people. I don't know if you've ever been trained about how to, not really ever had lifeguard training before, but I have been talked through around how you go out and you sort of save drowning people. And one of the things that they talk about is you need to be really careful, because sometimes drowning people can drown the person who's coming to save them, because they push the person down so that they can get a breath of air. In the same way that can happen, foster parents can absorb scars from those that they're trying to bring healing to. They can carry the scars that come from participating in another person's healing. That is the kind of beatitude looking way of being in the world. That is what it means to be the covenant people of God, to be the salt of the earth, to be living in the world as it really is alongside Jesus, that you do something about it, even if that means that you bear scars for another person's healing. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Within this church, we have a lot of doctors. And I've chatted with many of you. I've heard about the hours you do. And some of those times I've expressed concern about the hours you do. And you know what answer I usually get when I raise those queries with those doctors? Usually the same answer. They say something to the effect of, but Cam, if I don't, how will that young guy who can't afford to go private get the care that he needs? Because if you've got money, you can go through the private system. Not a problem. But what about that guy who doesn't have access to that system? How's he going to get the care he needs if I don't offer it? And not only do we have doctors in this congregation who pull massive hours purely to care for those who desperately need it, we also have doctors who will use their leave to travel overseas to do it all over again. And this time they'll do it for free. Because they live in the world as it really is. They see the brokenness that needs healing. And they are willing to give of their time and their energy to be God's healing in the world. We've got people who served on the police force for a long time. In some serious roles, armed defenders even. Seen some of the worst parts of society. And yet they got up day after day after day to get into that broken world, to see the brokenness that we would never see, to keep us safe, and to try and bring God's healing to those broken people who are caught in those cycles. This church is just full of people who in all sorts of different ways embody what it means to be salt and light in ways that we just don't see. Because it happens during the week. It happens in the workplaces, at schools, all sorts of different places. But they embody what it means to be the salt and light in the world. They have found their place in Jesus' story by following him in the world and living in it as it really is. And so let me invite you, let me encourage you to live in the world as it really is. To live in the world as it really is, and doing so with Jesus. May you live in such a way that you don't avoid brokenness, but do something about it. Where you don't look away from pain, but sit with others in it. Where you are willing even to be wounded for the healing of others. May you find your place in Jesus' story, the story of the one who was wounded for you, through following him, doing life with him in the world as it really is. Would you join me in prayer? Jesus, we thank you that you entered into our world. You entered into it as it really is. We thank you that you embraced us as we really are, that you absorbed the scars that were the result of our wrongs, also that we might experience not only your healing, but also your mercy, your love, grace, and compassion. And so we asked that as your body, you would open our eyes to see the people that you are calling us to be salt for. That as your body, you would strengthen our legs to go to the places that you're calling us to bring your light. And that as your body, you would give us your strength to be your presence in broken and messy places, that we might follow your way and so live lives of kingdom significance. This we pray in Jesus' name.